These files were never meant to be public, but someone reopened them. This is the Dark Bureau. As dawn breaks over another post-election morning, the city appears unchanged. Billboards stand at the crossroads scarred by graffiti, the silent aftermath of protests registered during the long campaign. There is a peculiar stillness, yet beneath it hums an anxiety known intimately by those who call this region home. No single announcement splinters the calm, but a striking poll result lingers in the collective mind. More than half of all citizens now believe the information on which they voted was manipulated, twisted by invisible hands well beyond their own borders. Daily routines persist. Street vendors haggle, buses rattle past offices, children trudge to school in the early light. But something is irrevocably altered below the surface. What appears as resignation or fatigue is actually the outward sign of a relentless, hidden battle. An ongoing war waged not with tanks or artillery, but with signals, whispers, and signatures. The Balkans, a perennial chessboard for rival powers, has entered a new era where sovereignty is challenged by means so subtle, so deeply embedded, that even those caught in its web struggle to separate truth from illusion. To understand this transformation, we must revisit expectations from not so long ago. The 1990s had seen devastating conflict tear through the peninsula, fracturing communities and redrawing borders. As the guns fell silent, the international community heralded a new dawn. The prospect of EU integration, liberal reforms, and an end to the old cycle of violence and tribal division. But history is rarely linear. In place of armies, emergent networks took root in the post-war shadows. Foreign intelligence agencies, influenced operatives, and local fixers armed with the tools of the digital age. Institutions, desperate for reconstruction funds, opened their doors to investment and expertise from every direction. Infrastructure contracts, especially in telecommunications and energy, became the new currency of influence. Foreign-backed companies won exclusive tenders for critical backbone upgrades, embedding proprietary technologies and creating dependencies that soon transcended economics. This shift was not widely noticed at first. Governments scrambling to modernise after decades of embargo and war welcomed outside capital with minimal scrutiny. A new rhetoric of connectivity, modernisation and public safety emerged. Cities vied to lead in digital transformation, installing cameras and fibre networks, rolling out cashless transit, connecting administrative offices across regions. The catch came in the fine print. Much of this technology was sourced via opaque procurement chains, where the true origins of hardware, software, and technical support vanished into a labyrinth of shell companies and nominal local partners. Diplomats praised joint ventures and smart city initiatives at public ceremonies, all while state surveillance devices, procured for traffic control or disaster response, were quietly subverted. The boundaries between legitimate innovation and covert access steadily blurred. The Balkan states, newly minted democracies with under-resourced institutions, found themselves lagging behind the sophistication of their own digital terrain. Anti-corruption bureaus and parliamentary oversight committees were mandated to scrutinise foreign contracts, but competing priorities and limited technical training meant vulnerabilities multiplied unchecked. Security agencies, both domestic and foreign, moved quickly to exploit the resulting vacuum, embedding listening devices in old city halls, intercepting encrypted correspondence, and monitoring social media discourse at massive scale. Europol, in a series of classified assessments, noted that cyber espionage attempts spiked in lockstep with every parliamentary crisis, major protest, or electoral rerun. The underbelly of what was hailed as an age of progress was in reality a patchwork of hidden threats, permeating the most basic exchanges of information across borders. It was a routine network review, part of a capacity-building project funded by an international donor that tipped off the region's first major investigation. An analyst at a modest regional cyber defence unit scanning for mundane malware flagged what appeared to be an anomalous heartbeat in government data traffic. The signals were sparse, piggybacking on routine health and transportation data, but carried the complex signature of a command and control relay. Efforts to trace their origin led straight into a maze. Cloud servers registered to subsidiaries of subsidiaries, business addresses pointing to rented spaces, and payments routed through tax havens. Each forensic thread pulled revealed further abstraction, tying activity to circumstances that often mapped uncannily well onto the region's political calendar. Debates in Parliament, surprise resignations, anonymous media leaks. In the months that followed, the investigation ballooned to involve specialist teams from 3 countries. Their findings painted a portrait not only of foreign meddling, but of the sophisticated repurposing of domestic elements. Paramilitary formations, many never fully demobilised after the 1990s and nominally repurposed as veteran societies or security consultancies, had quietly transitioned into new roles. Some acted as organisers for ostensibly grassroots protests. Others amplified targeted disinformation on social media, while a select few surfaced as advisors to opposition think tanks, open to foreign development funding. Their networks, cloaked in a legacy of nationalist legitimacy, became lightning rods for proxy operations, receiving funding that flowed through layers of non-profit grants, development contracts, and cultural initiatives. Financial regulators noted a suspicious surge in wire transfers to construction companies with no physical premises or discernible projects, clustering just before key legislative sessions. Parliamentary debates on anti-corruption reforms and judicial independence coincided with upticks in digitally coordinated protest activity. Newsrooms faced coordinated leaks of forged documents designed to fracture political alliances, while trusted journalists suddenly found their email accounts compromised. The scale of infiltration became evident when even court systems, thought to be air-gapped from public networks, were struck by data exfiltration that revealed the care with which official records had been falsified. The systemic segmentation of institutional networks, intended as a safeguard, had instead become a series of pressure points, allowing compartmentalized attacks to avoid detection while amplifying the crisis of trust within and between public agencies. Even routine internal memos became suspect, their authenticity doubted by recipients aware that their entire digital environment was subject to manipulation. The turning point arrived with the convening of a headline regional energy summit, long promoted as a linchpin for cross-border cooperation. Weeks before ministers were due to arrive, reports surfaced of new online movements and viral campaigns accusing negotiators of betrayal and corruption. Leaked diplomatic cables, later confirmed by credible cybersecurity teams, showed the uncanny timing of digital attacks. Phishing expeditions targeting personal accounts of delegates, news stories planted on fringe websites, and polarising memes flooding domestic discourse. Archival research revealed a clear sequence. Digital provocations and media stories were launched in advance, then echoed by newly registered local news portals and foreign broadcasters with vested interests in the summit's outcome. The agenda was systematically discredited in public, turning complex policy discussions into a media spectacle fraught with allegations and conspiracy. By the time investigators finished cataloguing and cross-referencing the attacks, it was too late. The summit's most ambitious agreements had been preemptively undermined. Negotiators arrived to find audiences primed for outrage and alliances frayed by seeded doubts. Within days, street-level protests followed, led by organisations later traced to the same shadow funding cycles. European Union observers, once expected to ensure fair play, found their presence weaponised in local coverage as evidence of outside interference rather than stability. Subsequent media coverage, both domestic and international, collapsed under the weight of manufactured narratives and legitimate confusion, amplifying disillusionment with every headline. Skepticism about the legitimacy of institutions and the basic security of the digital sphere reached new highs among the population, as citizens grew ever more doubtful about the reality conveyed by their screens. The consequences of these exposures unfurled rapidly. Early arrests, publicised as breakthroughs, soon gave way to muted court proceedings mired in secrecy and jurisdictional disputes. Defendants appeared in courtrooms under layers of anonymity, often protected by diplomatic immunity or rescued by legal technicalities in bilateral treaties. Parliamentary hearings devolved into theatrical contests, with rival factions trading accusations of treason, evidence suppression, and complicity with foreign powers. The most prominent anti-corruption units, hailed for their independence, found themselves targets of parallel disinformation campaigns, accused on social media of acting as arms of rival intelligence services or subverting the national interest. Efforts by civil society groups to demand transparency in how IT systems had been procured or how surveillance contracts had been awarded met only with redacted documents and procedural delays. Policymakers attempted to respond. Several governments established national cybersecurity task forces, advised by EU experts and staffed with young technocrats trained abroad. But the creation of these units itself became the subject of fresh attacks. An orchestrated campaign branded the new cyberzars as foreign agents, generating viral hashtags and hostile op-eds that followed their every move. Genuine improvements, like opening procurement processes to independent review or granting anti-corruption teams new investigative powers, were either insufficiently publicised or quickly muddied by counter-narratives. The international community, learning hard lessons, began to recalibrate its assistance, focusing less exclusively on hardware or software provision, and more on fostering institutional resilience, media literacy, and shared standards for transparency and incident response. Some positive shifts took hold. Ministries established new checks on digital supply chains and data storage standards, prompted by joint training initiatives and mounting public scrutiny. Anti-corruption agencies in a handful of states won expanded mandates and increased budgets, allowing the development of in-house technical capacity. Courts modernised chain of custody rules for digital evidence, cooperating with international counterparts to recognise cybercrime not as an anomaly, but as integrated with routine patterns of influence and fraud. Academic institutions began rolling out specialised programs in information security and public policy, creating a pipeline of experts who understood the geopolitical nuances alongside technical detail. Yet these measures faced structural headwinds. In regions where institutional trust was already low, reforms themselves often became targets, portrayed as smokescreens for new forms of dependency or as power grabs masked by jargon. Misinformation and uncertainty became the default battleground, as each policy or regulatory step risked triggering a new wave of online mobilisation or international posturing. Citizens, already exhausted by years of oscillating promises, found themselves doubting not only politicians, but the institutions of civil society and the purportedly independent watchdogs. Social surveys indicated a sharp decline in overall confidence, not just in government, but also in the media, the courts, and the digital infrastructure underpinning daily life. State representatives, testifying before international observers, spoke candidly at last of a profound sense of vulnerability that could not be addressed by legislative fixes alone. The enduring legacy of this hybrid conflict is neither spectacular nor easily filmed. It is a form of quiet corrosion. The overlap of intelligence operations, proxy actors, and compromised technology leaves scars not in front-page headlines, but in the deepening gap between governance and legitimacy. For the Balkan Peninsula, the dividing line between domestic and foreign, authentic and manufactured, has become elusive, subtly the definition of sovereignty itself is now endlessly contested. The challenge moving forward lies not only in technical solutions or more sophisticated oversight, but in the painstaking job of restoring institutional trust and establishing a new social compact, capable of withstanding the persistent undertow of covert influence. The ghosts of past wars still haunt the region, but it is in the ambiguous frontier between digital systems and civic belief that the stakes for peace and democracy may now be highest.